The rain-slick streets of Seattle gleamed under the sodium glow of streetlights, a city alive with the hum of tech giants and startups clawing for dominance. Ethan Morrow, 42, sat in his silver Toyota Corolla parked outside the glass and steel monolith of Cascade Dynamics. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as he replayed the meeting that had just gutted his life. 18 years. 18 years of blood, sweat, and code, poured into a company he'd built from nothing, only to be tossed out like yesterday's news. The dashboard clock blinked 8:47 p.m. He hadn't even had time to grab his coat before security escorted him to the elevator. Inside the towering headquarters, the air had been thick with betrayal. Ethan had been summoned to the 32nd floor, where CEO Victor Kane, a slick 38-year-old with a penchant for tailored suits and TED Talk platitudes, waited behind a mahogany desk. The room smelled of leather and ambition, a far cry from the cramped server room where Ethan had spent his early days debugging code until dawn. Victor didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Ethan, your platform's outdated," he'd said, his voice smooth as a knife. "The board's decided we need fresh blood. We're moving in a new direction." Ethan's stomach had lurched. Outdated? He'd built Cascade software from scratch, a revolutionary system that powered their logistics empire, handling billions in transactions across the Pacific Northwest. His algorithms, his life's work, were the backbone of their success. Sure, the interface wasn't flashy, but it was bulletproof, scalable, and legally his. The patent for the core algorithm sat in a safe deposit box, registered under a personal license he'd never signed over, a precaution he'd taken years ago, when Cascade was just a dream in a dingy Belltown loft. "It's stupid," Ethan had started, but Victor cut him off, sliding a termination letter across the desk. "It's done. HR has your severance package, 2 months' pay. Generous, considering." Generous? Ethan had nearly laughed. He'd sacrificed birthdays, anniversaries, his daughter Lily's first piano recital, all for Cascade. He'd been there when Victor was still a junior exec, back when the company was a scrappy startup with big ideas and bigger debts. Now, with a private equity firm, Sterling Capital, sinking its claws into Cascade, Ethan was expendable. He'd walked out in a daze, the patent's existence burning in his mind like a lifeline. They could take his job, his office, his pride, but they couldn't touch his algorithm. Not without a fight. Ethan's apartment in Capitol Hill was a modest 2-bedroom, cluttered with books, vinyl records, and the faint smell of coffee that never seemed to fade. It was 10:12 p.m. when he slumped onto the couch, still in his work clothes, a glass of bourbon in hand. His phone buzzed. His sister, Rachel, 39, a public defender with a knack for cutting through bullshit. He ignored it. He wasn't ready to admit he'd been fired. Not to her, not to anyone, not even to Lily, who was 16 and probably glued to her phone in her room, oblivious to the storm brewing in her father's world. He opened his laptop, the screen casting a pale glow across his face. His fingers hesitated, then typed, "Sterling Capital Acquisition, Cascade Dynamics." The search results spilled out like a bad omen. Sterling was a vulture, known for buying companies, gutting their assets, and flipping them for profit. They'd acquired Cascade 6 months ago, and Ethan had felt the shift immediately. New hires with Ivy League degrees, endless restructuring meetings, and whispers of a shiny new platform to replace his legacy system. Legacy. The word stung. He wasn't some relic. He was the guy who'd made Cascade a name in the first place. Ethan's eyes drifted to a framed photo on the shelf. Him, Lily, and his late wife Sarah at Pike Place Market, grinning under a rare Seattle sun. Sarah had died 4 years ago, a car accident that left a hole Ethan still couldn't fill. He'd thrown himself into work after that, coding through grief, building Cascade into a titan while Lily grew up faster than he'd wanted. He'd promised her stability, a future. Now at 42, he was jobless, and the company he'd nurtured was about to be carved up by suits who didn't know a line of code from a latte order. He pulled a worn notebook from his bag, its pages filled with meticulous notes, every update, every patch, every decision he'd made for Cascade's platform since 2007. He'd always been paranoid, a habit from his days as a freelance coder in the dot-com boom. Back then, he'd seen friends lose their work to shady contracts and corporate takeovers. So he'd kept records, locked down his intellectual property, and never trusted the C-suite. Victor might think he'd won, but Ethan had an ace, the algorithm's license. Without it, Cascade's new platform would be a hollow shell, and Sterling's grand plans would crash faster than a server under a DDoS attack. The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of burnt toast and Lily's voice from the kitchen. "Dad? You okay? You look like you got hit by a bus." She was leaning against the counter, her dark hair tied back, wearing a Nirvana t-shirt and an expression that said she wasn't buying any excuses. At 16, she had her mother's sharp intuition and a teenager's knack for calling out nonsense. "I'm fine," Ethan lied, forcing a smile. "Just a late night." He couldn't tell her yet, not until he had a plan. Lily rolled her eyes but didn't push, grabbing her backpack and heading for the door. "Don't forget, I've got band practice tonight," she called. "And we need groceries, like actual food, not just ramen." As the door clicked shut, Ethan's resolve hardened. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. He opened his laptop again, this time pulling up his old code repositories. The algorithm wasn't just a piece of software. It was his legacy, his proof that he'd built something real. Victor and Sterling thought they could erase him, but they'd underestimated one thing. Ethan Morrow didn't break. He planned. He started drafting an email to a lawyer friend, Clara Newen, who specialized in IP law. If Cascade wanted to play dirty, he'd hit back harder. The algorithm was his, and he'd make sure they paid for every bite they tried to steal. Outside, Seattle's gray sky loomed, but for the first time in hours, Ethan felt a spark of something fierce. Anger, yes, but also purpose. This was his city, his code, his fight, and he was just getting started. The Seattle skyline shimmered through a haze of drizzle, but inside Cascade Dynamics, the air was electric with panic. It was Wednesday, 3 days since Ethan Morrow's unceremonious firing, and the 32nd floor was a war zone of ringing phones, shouting execs, and the acrid smell of burnt coffee. Ethan, now 42 and nursing a black coffee at a diner across town, had no idea the empire he'd built was crumbling, but he felt it, a gut-deep certainty that Victor Kane's arrogance was about to blow up in his face. At Cascade, the new platform, rushed into production by Victor's hand-picked consultants from a flashy San Francisco firm, had imploded. The consultants, all sharp suits and buzzwords, had promised a next-gen system to replace Ethan's outdated algorithm. They'd gutted his code, slapped on a glossy interface, and ignored the warnings from the engineering team. At 2:17 a.m., the system crashed hard. Orders vanished, shipments stalled, and clients from Portland to Vancouver were screaming. By morning, Cascade's biggest customer, a logistics giant handling half the region's e-commerce, threatened to pull their $200 million 0-cents contract. Social media lit up with hashtags like Cascade fail, and the stock, already shaky under Sterling Capital's grip, tanked 12% before lunch. Victor, his tie loosened and face pale, paced the boardroom. "Fix it!" he barked at the consultants, who were frantically typing on laptops that might as well have been paperweights. The lead consultant, a 30-something named Derek with a man bun and zero humility, stammered, "We didn't anticipate the dependencies. It's complex." Complex? Ethan's algorithm, the one they'd called Legacy, had handled those dependencies flawlessly for 18 years. Now without it, Cascade was a ship taking on water, and Victor was out of lifeboats. Ethan sat in the diner, rain streaking the window, his laptop open to a news alert. Cascade Dynamics system outage, Sparks client fury. His heart thudded, a mix of vindication and dread. He'd warned them. He'd begged Victor to phase in changes slowly, to respect the system's architecture. But Victor had wanted a headline, a shiny new toy to impress Sterling's investors. Ethan's fingers hovered over his phone, tempted to call Lily, his 16-year-old daughter, and tell her everything. But she was at school, probably texting her friends about band practice, unaware her father's world was on fire. He couldn't burden her. Not yet. His phone buzzed. Not Lily, but Rachel, his sister. "Ethan, what the hell's going on? Cascades all over Twitter. You okay?" Her voice, sharp with worry, cut through the diner's hum. Ethan exhaled. "I'm fine. They're not." He told her about the firing, the algorithm, the patent he still held. Rachel, a public defender who'd faced down corrupt cops and shady landlords, didn't miss a beat. "They screwed you, but you've got leverage. That patent's a grenade. Pull the pin." Before he could reply, another call came through, an unknown number. Ethan hesitated, then answered. "Ethan Morrow?" The voice was gravelly, familiar. "It's Henry Caldwell." Henry, 65, was Cascade's founder, a grizzled coder who'd started the company in the 90s before retiring after Sterling's buyout. Ethan hadn't spoken to him in years, but Henry's tone was urgent. "Meet me at the old warehouse in Sodo. 1 hour. We need to talk." The Sodo warehouse, a relic from Cascade's early days, smelled of dust and motor oil. Henry stood by a rusted filing cabinet, his flannel shirt and gray beard a stark contrast to the corporate sheen of Cascade's current regime. "They're imploding," Henry said, handing Ethan a manila folder. "And you've got a way to take them down." Yeah. Inside the folder was a contract from Sterling's acquisition, buried in legalese but clear as day. If Cascade's core system failed within 2 years of the buyout, Henry retained the right to repurchase the company at a fraction of its value. "Victor didn't read the fine print," Henry said, a glint in his eye. "But I did." Ethan's pulse raced. This was a lifeline, not just for him, but for every employee who'd been loyal to Cascade's original vision. "Why me?" he asked. Henry's gaze softened. "Because you built it, Ethan. Not Victor, not Sterling. You. And I know you kept that algorithm locked down. Use it." As Ethan left the warehouse, his phone lit up again. This time it was Elaine Harper, 45, CEO of Meridian Systems, a rival firm with a reputation for integrity. They'd met at a conference years ago, bonding over their mutual disdain for corporate posturing. "Ethan," Elaine said, her voice steady but warm, "I heard about Cascade. Their clients are jumping ship and I want you on my team. Your algorithm, your rules. I'll fund the legal fight if you bring the IP." Ethan's throat tightened. An ally. A real one. Back at his apartment, Ethan found a USB drive slipped under his door. No note, just a label. For EM. He plugged it in, heart pounding. It was a gold mine. Emails, memos, recordings. Proof that Victor and Sterling had planned to reverse engineer Ethan's algorithm, violate his patent, and sell the tech to a Chinese conglomerate for billions. The evidence came from Cascade's old guard. Programmers, admins, even the janitor who'd overheard Victor's late-night calls. They hadn't forgotten Ethan, the guy who'd brought donuts to 3 a.m. coding sessions, who'd fought for their raises when Victor wouldn't. Ethan sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. These were his people, risking their jobs to back him. He thought of Lily practicing her guitar in her room, her future hanging in the balance. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, who'd believed in him when Cascade was just a sketch on a napkin. Tears stung his eyes, not from defeat, but from the weight of loyalty, the kind Victor would never understand. Ethan wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who'd built Cascade, for the dream they'd shared before greed tore it apart. He opened his laptop and drafted an email to Clara Nguyen, his lawyer friend, attaching the USB's contents. "We're going to war," he wrote. Outside, Seattle's rain fell harder, but Ethan felt a fire kindling inside him. Cascade was crumbling, but he wasn't. Not yet. Victor had started this fight, but Ethan would finish it, and when he did, the whole city would know his name. The Seattle courthouse loomed like a fortress under a rare April sun, its stone facade a silent witness to the battle about to unfold. Ethan Morrow, 42, stood on the steps, his navy suit slightly wrinkled but his resolve ironclad. In his briefcase was the patent for his algorithm, the USB drive of damning evidence, and Henry Caldwell's acquisition clause, a legal arsenal that could topple Cascade Dynamics and its smarmy CEO, Victor Kane. Inside, a courtroom waited, packed with reporters, former colleagues, and Sterling Capital's stone-faced lawyers. Ethan's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the fierce clarity of a man who'd been pushed too far. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Lily, his 16-year-old daughter. It was about Sarah, his late wife, whose memory fueled his fight. It was about every coder, admin, and dreamer who'd poured their soul into Cascade, only to be betrayed. The past week had been a whirlwind. Clara Nguyen, Ethan's lawyer, and a 40-year-old shark in a pencil skirt had torn through Victor's scheme like a hurricane. The USB drive, gifted by Cascade's loyal old guard, revealed Victor's plan to steal Ethan's algorithm and sell it to a foreign conglomerate, violating his patent and federal law. Elaine Harper, CEO of Meridian Systems, had bankrolled the legal fees, her faith in Ethan unwavering. Henry, Cascade's grizzled founder, had rallied the troops, his acquisition clause a ticking bomb under Sterling's feet. If Cascade's system failed, as it spectacularly had, Henry could buy back the company for pennies. And Ethan's algorithm, still legally his, was the key to forcing their hand. Inside the courtroom, the air crackled with tension. Victor sat at the defense table, his tailored suit failing to mask the sweat beading on his forehead. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, peered over her glasses as Clara presented the evidence. Emails, recordings, and a forensic analysis proving Cascade's new platform was a botched ripoff of Ethan's code. "Mr. Kane," Clara said, her voice slicing through the room, "you fired the plaintiff, ignored his warnings, and attempted to steal his intellectual property. Your actions caused a $300 million 0-cents outage and jeopardized contracts worth billions. Care to explain?" Victor stammered, his charm crumbling under the weight of truth. The turning point came when Ethan took the stand. He didn't grandstand or rage. He spoke quietly, his voice steady, about the nights he'd coded until dawn, the birthdays he'd missed with Lily, the promise he'd made to Sarah to build something lasting. Cascade wasn't just a job, he said, eyes locking with the jury. It was a family, and they threw us away. The courtroom was silent, jurors dabbing their eyes, reporters scribbling furiously. Even Henry, in the back row, wiped a tear. When Ethan revealed the patent and Henry's clause, Sterling's lawyers went pale. They knew the game was over. The ruling came fast. The judge ordered Cascade to cease using Ethan's algorithm, crippling their operations. She upheld Henry's right to repurchase the company at a 90% discount, citing Sterling's gross mismanagement. And she slapped Victor with a personal fine for attempted IP theft, his career in ashes. As the gavel fell, Ethan felt a weight lift, not victory, but justice. Outside, reporters swarmed, but Ethan slipped away, needing air, needing Lily. That night, in a Capitol Hill diner, Ethan and Henry sealed the deal. Henry, 65 and grinning like a kid, signed the papers to buy back Cascade, with Ethan as CTO and a 20% stake. "No layoffs," Ethan insisted, his voice firm. "These people stuck their necks out for us." Henry nodded, passing him a beer. "You're the boss now, kid." Elaine joined them, her offer still on the table, but Ethan declined. "I'm staying," he said. "This is home." The next month was a blur of rebuilding. Cascade's new platform, built on Ethan's algorithm with input from the original team, launched to rave reviews. Clients returned, drawn by Ethan's promise of transparency and a $50 million 0-cents compensation fund for the outage. But Ethan went further. He gave every employee a small equity stake, a nod to the family he'd fought for. "You built this," he told them at a company-weighted meeting, his voice cracking as cheers erupted. He open-sourced parts of the code, inviting the Seattle tech community to contribute, a move that earned Cascade a cult following among coders nationwide. Cascade Reborn trended for days. At home, Ethan found balance. He took Lily to band practice, cooked terrible pancakes, and told her the truth about the fight. "You're a badass, Dad," she said, hugging him. And Ethan nearly broke down. He hung a photo of Sarah in his office, her smile a reminder of why he'd kept going. Late at night, he'd sit with his notebook, not coding but writing, a letter to his team thanking them for their loyalty, their courage, their trust. On a crisp June evening, Ethan stood on a rooftop overlooking Seattle, the Space Needle glowing against the dusk. Cascade's relaunch party buzzed below, laughter and music spilling into the night. Henry raised a glass, toasting the comeback of the century. Elaine, now a board member, winked at Ethan. Lily, in a rare moment of teenage softness, leaned against him, whispering, "Mom would be proud." Ethan's throat tightened. Tears welling, not from pain, but from the realization that he'd done it. Not for revenge, but for something bigger. Cascade wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement, a testament to what a group of stubborn, brilliant people could do when they refused to give up. As fireworks burst over Puget Sound, Ethan looked out at the city he'd fought for. Victor was gone, Sterling was humbled, and Cascade was theirs again. But the real victory was this. He'd built something that belonged to everyone, a legacy that would outlive him. And for the first time in years, Ethan Morrow felt whole.